A leaden sky hung over Vermont like a heavy blanket of regret and unfulfilled hopes. Keanu Reeves drove his old Ford along a winding road between ancient maple trees. His eyes, reflecting the fatigue of endless filming and fake smiles, peered at the road signs leading to Middlebury, a town lost in time and space. "The navigator says you have arrived at your destination." A mechanical voice broke the silence of the cabin. Keanu turned off the GPS and stopped the car. In front of him towered an old Victorian house, a two-story building with an attic and shingles darkened by time. His grandfather's house, a place he knew only from the rare whispered mentions his mother made, like a secret he couldn't let out into the world. A week ago, when his lawyer had called to tell him his grandfather had died, Keanu had felt a strange feeling, not grief for a man he'd never met, but an inexplicable emptiness, as if a door had closed on a room he'd never visited. Now that room, that house, and all the secrets it held were his. Stepping out of the car, Keanu breathed in the cool autumn air. It smelled of fallen leaves, damp earth, and a faint chemical tang that seemed to come from the nearby river. "Mr. Reeves?" The voice came out of nowhere, causing Keanu to turn around. An older man with a neatly trimmed gray beard was standing at the gate. His shabby jacket and calloused hands marked him out as a manual laborer, but his eyes were clear and piercing, with an intelligent insight. "I'm Harold Finch, a friend of your grandfather's," the man said, holding out his hand. "He asked me to watch the house until you arrived." As he shook the calloused palm, Keanu felt a strange chill run down his spine. This man probably knew his grandfather better than anyone in his family. "It's nice to meet you," Keanu said. "To tell you the truth, I don't know much about my grandfather." Harold's face darkened, the wrinkles deepening like shadows in the setting sun. "Joseph was a complicated man, Mr. Reeves, but he was fair. Too fair for this town." Keanu took a duffel bag from the trunk and followed Harold to the house. The creaky floorboards of the porch greeted him like old friends, whispering stories he'd never heard. Inside, the house was austere but cozy. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled the living room, each stacked with legal volumes, tattered files, and handwritten notes. The grandfather Keanu had never known stood before him in these silent witnesses to his life. "Was he a lawyer?" Keanu asked, running his fingers along the spines of the books. "Environmental law, corporate responsibility, public interest law." The titles blurred before his eyes. "One of the best," Harold nodded, until they shut him up. "They?" Harold went to the window, looking out at the river, glittering in the distance in the dying sun. "Nova Therapeutics, the pharmaceutical giant, built a plant upstream 15 years ago. Since then, the water in the river has been—" He paused, choosing his words. "It's not what it used to be." Keanu went to the window, staring out at the silver ribbon of the river winding through the hills. "You're talking about pollution?" "I'm talking about murder," Harold snapped, his eyes flashing with anger. "When a corporation knowingly dumps toxic waste into the water, knowing it's going to end up in wells and faucets, knowing people are going to drink it, bathe in it, water their gardens with it, what is that if not murder?" Keanu was silent, struck by the passion in the old man's voice. He had come here to sort out his inheritance, and perhaps take a break from the hustle and bustle of Hollywood. The last thing he expected was to get caught up in some local environmental conflict. "Your grandfather was the only one who dared to speak out against them," Harold continued. "He collected evidence, interviewed former employees, analyzed disease statistics. He almost took the case to court. And then," Harold's heavy sigh filled the room. "And then what?" Keanu asked, feeling the tension thicken like storm clouds outside the window. "And then he was offered a choice," Harold chuckled bitterly. "Money or his life. He chose his life, your life, Mr. Reeves, and your mother's." The words sounded like a clap of thunder. Keanu felt the ground slip out from under his feet. "What do you mean?" "Threats, Mr. Reeves, quite specific. Pictures of your mother outside the house, information about you, pictures through the bedroom window. He could continue to fight or protect his family. Joseph chose his family, but he never forgave himself for that decision." Keanu sank into the worn leather chair, trying to process what he had heard. Fragments of his childhood memories began to fit together. The sudden move to Canada, his mother's nightmares, the lack of conversation about his grandfather. "Why did my mother never tell me about this?" "Fear, Mr. Reeves. Pure, raw fear. Joseph insisted that she take you as far away from here as possible." Harold sighed. He continued to monitor the situation, gathering information, but this time in secret. He hoped that one day he would be able to finish what he had started, but time and illness proved too quick for him. Keanu stood and walked over to the fireplace, where a photograph stood in a simple frame, a young man with piercing eyes holding a small boy in his arms. The resemblance was undeniable. The same jawline, the same shape of the eyes. A grandfather and grandson, separated by life but united by blood. Why are you telling me all this, Harold? What do you want from me? The old man walked over to the bookcase and pulled out one of the folders. Nothing, Mr. Reeves. The decision is yours. But your grandfather left you more than just a house. He held out the folder. He left you his fight. Keanu opened the folder. Inside were documents, photographs, medical reports. The legacy of a man who refused to remain silent in the face of injustice. The doorbell broke the moment. Harold tensed, his gaze darting to the window. That's odd. I wasn't expecting anyone, he muttered. Keanu started toward the door, but Harold stopped him with a gentle but firm gesture. Allow me, Mr. Reeves. Harold opened the door, blocking the entrance. A middle-aged man in an impeccable suit stood on the threshold, with a perfect smile that did not reach his eyes. Harold, an old friend, the stranger exclaimed with feigned warmth. I heard we had company. Mayor Connors, Harold replied dryly. What a surprise. The mayor, without waiting for an invitation, stepped into the house. I simply had to welcome a celebrity to our humble town in person, he said, extending his hand to Keanu. Robert Connors, mayor of Middlebury. It is a great honor for me. The mayor's handshake was too firm, his smile too wide, his gaze too appraising. Keanu immediately felt an aversion to this man, although he could not explain why. Keanu Reeves, he introduced himself briefly. Oh, I know, the mayor laughed. Who doesn't know Neo, John Wick? My daughter loves your films. Connors looked around the room, his gaze lingering for a moment on the open folder. I heard you inherited your grandfather's house. My condolences. Thank you, Keanu answered coldly. You know, if you need help with the paperwork, or maybe you want to sell the house, the mayor took out a business card. I would be happy to help. I plan to stay here. The words escaped Keanu before he realized them. He had not even planned it, but now the decision seemed the only right one. The mayor's smile became a little strained. Of course. Middlebury is a great place. Quiet, calm, no unnecessary troubles. The last words sounded like a warning. Harold cleared his throat. Mr. Reeves just got here, Mayor Connors. He needs to rest from the journey. Of course, the mayor nodded. I won't disturb you. By the way, Harold, he turned to the old man, how is your grandson? Little Jason, right? Still dreams of becoming a teacher? Harold froze, and Keanu noticed how his hands clenched into fists. Jason is fine. Thank you for your concern. The old man's voice was tense. Good to hear. Give him my best wishes. The mayor turned back to Keanu. And to you, Mr. Reeves, welcome to Middlebury. I hope you find what you are looking for here. When the door closed behind the mayor, Harold sank heavily into a chair. His face went as gray as the November sky. It was a threat, Keanu said quietly. Harold nodded. Jason is all I have left. His parents? He didn't finish the sentence, but Keanu already understood. Died of water-related diseases? Cancer, Mr. Reeves, a rare type that only occurs in areas with heavy chemical pollution. First my son, then his wife. Now I have only my grandson left. Keanu returned to the folder, leafing through the papers. Graphs showing a sharp increase in cancers, birth defects, respiratory problems. All starting around the same time, after Nova Therapeutics built its plant. Why is the town silent? Why is no one doing anything about this? They bought the silence, Mr. Reeves. Nova Therapeutics is the largest employer in the area. They built a new school, renovated the hospital, and sponsor local events. Connors gets donations for his election campaigns. The local newspaper gets advertising contracts. Anyone who has something to say gets something in exchange for keeping quiet. Who doesn't agree to keep quiet? Harold looked out the window at the darkening sky. They quickly realized this is a bad idea. Evening was falling on Middlebury, casting a soft twilight over the house. Keanu switched on the desk lamp, and its light fell on the open desk drawer he was sorting through. Old photographs, letters, documents. The life of a stranger, his grandfather, laid out before him. Among the papers, he found a Harvard Law School diploma and a Vermont bar license issued in the name of Joseph Reeves. I never knew he was a lawyer, Keanu said. My mother only said he was a man of principle who chose solitude. He was more than just a lawyer, Harold said, making tea in the old-fashioned kitchen. He was an advocate, a man who believed that justice was not an abstract concept, but a daily choice. Keanu continued to shuffle through the papers, immersing himself in a life he had never known. Suddenly, his hand paused over an old envelope. Inside was a letter in his mother's familiar handwriting. Dear Dad, I know we haven't spoken in years, and maybe this letter isn't enough to fix everything that happened between us. But I want you to know that Keanu has grown up to be a good man. He has your resilience, your stubbornness, your heart. Maybe one day you will meet. The letter was dated 5 years earlier. Keanu felt his throat tighten with unwanted emotion. Why didn't he contact me? After that letter? Harold put 2 cups of tea on the table. He wanted to, Mr. Reeves. Believe me, he really wanted to. But by then, the cancer had already begun to work. It was a cruel irony that the man who had fought against water poisoning had died from the disease that water had caused. Night was falling on the house when a knock on the door interrupted their conversation again. This time, Keanu opened it himself, ignoring Harold's warnings. A young woman stood in the doorway, soaking wet from the rain that had begun. Her face was pale, her eyes full of despair. Mr. Reeves? Her voice trembled. My name is Elizabeth Morris. I need your help. My son... She paused, swallowing tears. My son is in the hospital. The doctors say it's poisoning. From our well. Please, you have to help. They all say it's an accident, but I know the truth. I know what this company is doing. Keanu exchanged glances with Harold, who appeared in the hallway. The old man nodded slightly. Come in. Keanu stepped aside, letting the woman into the house. Elizabeth walked into the living room, leaving wet footprints behind her. Her hands were shaking as she pulled a thick folder out of her bag. This is everything I collected. Water tests from wells all over the city, medical examination results, statements from former plant workers. Joseph helped me. She looked up at Keanu. Your grandfather was the only one who wasn't afraid of them. Keanu took the folder, feeling its weight, not just physical, but moral. Mrs. Morris, I don't know what I can do. You're a famous person, Elizabeth interrupted. They'll listen to you. They'll listen to you. No one hears me. No one sees me. Her voice rose, anger and despair mixed in it. My son is 8 years old, Mr. Reeves. 8, and he's in the hospital, hooked up to machines because he drank water from our well. The water that the corporation has poisoned with its waste. Harold put his hand on her shoulder, trying to calm her down. Elizabeth, Mr. Reeves just got here. He hasn't had time yet. And my son doesn't have time. She turned to Keanu, and he saw his fear, his pain, his determination reflected in her eyes. Your grandfather believed that you would continue his work. He told me so. My grandson is a good man, he said. I beg you, prove that he was right. The room fell into silence, broken only by the sound of the rain drumming on the roof. Keanu looked at the folders, at the documents, at the faces of Harold and Elizabeth, people he had just met, but who were already expecting something from him, something that was bigger than himself. I'm not a lawyer, he said quietly. I'm an actor. I play characters, but I am not them. But you are the grandson of Joseph Reeves, Harold answered simply, and it means so much more. Keanu went to the window. The rain had gotten heavier, turning the world outside into a blur. Somewhere out there in the darkness lay a boy he'd never met, a boy whose life depended on decisions made by men in expensive suits who valued profit over lives. In that moment, Keanu knew he'd already made his decision. Ever since he'd seen the photograph on the mantelpiece, ever since he'd read his mother's letter, ever since he'd felt something inside him respond to Harold's quiet determination and Elizabeth's desperate courage, he turned to face them. Tell me everything. His voice was quiet but firm. From the beginning. I want to know every detail. Elizabeth let out a sigh of relief, as if throwing off a weight she had been carrying for years. It all started 15 years ago, when Nova Therapeutics built its factory on the banks of the river. Keanu listened as the night turned to dawn, as the rain grew heavier and then died down, as the story unfolded before him, like a grim script in which there were no heroes, no special effects, but there was real life, real pain, and real evil. And somewhere deep inside, he felt something awakening that had never been in his roles. Not the righteous anger of Neo, not the cold determination of John Wick, but something deeper, more personal. The legacy of Joseph Reeves, silent for years, now spoke with his voice. In that moment, he was no longer just Keanu Reeves, an actor in Hollywood. He became the heir to a struggle, a defender of a truth that had been hidden for so long. He became what he was always meant to be. And Nova Therapeutics didn't know it yet, but their worst nightmare had just come into play. The morning fog was rolling over Middlebury, turning the small town into a ghostly landscape from a forgotten dream. Keanu Reeves stood by the window in his hospital room, watching the first rays of sunlight cut through the white haze. Behind him, the medical equipment connected to Jacob Morris's small body beeped softly. The 8-year-old boy lay pale, almost blending into the hospital sheets. The blood purification system hummed monotonously next to the bed, methodically removing the toxins that were wreaking havoc on the child's body. Elizabeth dozed in a chair next to her son's bed, her exhausted face still looking tensely alert even in her sleep. The whole scene, the dimly lit room, the life support machines, the exhausted mother at the bedside of her dying child, seemed too real, too painful for the world Keanu was used to. The door to the room opened quietly and a doctor entered, a graying man with tired eyes and a strained smile. "Mr. Reeves," he extended his hand. "Dr. Greenberg, I've heard of your, interest in the boy's condition." Keanu shook his hand, noting the odd intonation in the doctor's voice. "How is he?" Dr. Greenberg glanced at Elizabeth's sleeping form and lowered his voice. "His condition has stabilized but hasn't improved. Toxic damage to the kidneys and liver, high levels of heavy metals in the blood." He hesitated. "Mr. Reeves, can I speak to you outside the room?" They stepped out into the sterile white hallway. As soon as the door closed, the doctor's expression changed, replacing the professional mask with an expression of wary concern. "Look, I don't know why you're here, but you need to be careful," he said quickly, looking around nervously. "Elizabeth Morris is a problematic woman. Her accusations against Nova Therapeutics are baseless and dangerous." Keanu narrowed his eyes, studying the doctor's face. "Baseless? Her son is dying from heavy metal poisoning that doesn't accidentally appear in drinking water." Dr. Greenberg pursed his lips. "Mr. Reeves, I'm not denying that the boy was poisoned, but the source could be anything. Old pipes, improper storage of chemicals at home, even agricultural pesticides. Accusing a corporation without direct evidence is slander." Keanu finished the sentence, watching the doctor nervously adjust his tie. "I wonder how much Nova Therapeutics invests in this hospital each year, Dr. Greenberg?" The doctor went pale. "That's unprofessional of you, Mr. Reeves. I only care about the well-being of my patients." "Then why was there no mention of possible industrial contamination in Jacob's chart? Why weren't any samples of the Morris well water taken for analysis?" The doctor's lips formed a thin line. "You're an actor, Mr. Reeves, not a doctor or an ecologist. I'd advise you not to meddle in matters you don't understand." With that, he turned and walked quickly down the hallway. Keanu watched him go, feeling anger building inside him. Anger and determination. "Sorry." The water from the Morris well was cloudy, with a metallic sheen that was noticeable even in the glass bottle. Keanu held it up to the light, studying the strange rainbow sheen on the surface. "It has started getting like this about a month ago," Elizabeth said, standing in the middle of her modest kitchen. "It was just a taste at first, but we got used to it. Then Jacob started complaining of stomach pains." Her voice faltered, and she turned away, pretending to be busy searching for something in a drawer. Keanu gave her time to collect herself. "I need to run an independent analysis of this water," he said, capping the bottle. "And not at the local lab." "I tried," Elizabeth said with a bitter smile. "2 private labs in Burlington refused to accept samples once they found out the address. A third took my money but never sent me the results. After that, I ran out of funds." Keanu nodded, making a mental note. "Money is not an issue. I have contacts in Los Angeles. Private labs that are not subject to local influence." He paused. "But we need other samples too, from families living downstream from the plant." Elizabeth shook her head. "You don't understand, Mr. Reeves. No one will openly oppose Nova Therapeutics. Many work at the plant. Others are connected to suppliers, contractors. They have tentacles everywhere here." Keanu glanced around the modest kitchen, stopping at the children's drawings magnetized to the refrigerator. Vivid, life-filled pictures drawn by the hand of a child who was now fighting for his life in a hospital room. "Someone has to start," he said quietly. "Otherwise, nothing will ever change." Elizabeth's gaze softened. "You really are like your grandfather." She took a worn business card from her pocket. "This is Michael Drayton, a journalist from the Boston Herald. He was the only one who showed interest in our story. But then his editor closed the investigation. Not enough evidence, they said." Keanu took the card, studying the name and contact information. Perhaps it's time to give him a new story. The mayor of Middlebury's office was an elegant Victorian building in the center of town. Robert Connors greeted Keanu with the same wide, fake smile as the day before. "Mr. Reeves, what a pleasant surprise." He shook Keanu's hand vigorously, motioning him to sit in the leather chair in front of the massive oak desk. "To what do I owe this visit?" "Decided to explore our picturesque town?" Keanu sat down, looking around the office. Diplomas and certificates lined the walls, photos of Connors with various politicians, including the governor and one of the senators. On a separate shelf were several awards for contribution to the development of the local community. "I came to talk to you about Jacob Morris," Keanu said bluntly. The mayor's smile grew a little less sincere. "Oh yeah, a sad case. Poor boy, I heard he's getting better." "No, he's not. He's dying of heavy metal poisoning that got into his family's well from the river." Connors sighed, leaning back in his chair. Mr. Reeves, I understand your concern. I really do. But let's be realistic. We don't know for sure what caused the boy's poisoning. We can, Keanu said, pulling a copy of Jacob's medical records out of his briefcase. Toxicology tests show high levels of mercury, lead, and cadmium. These are the metals found in elevated concentrations in pharmaceutical wastewater. Connors frowned, glancing at the papers. Where did you get this? Does it matter? The mayor stood and walked to the window, looking out onto the town square. Mr. Reeves, I appreciate your concern. I really do. But you have to understand, Nova Therapeutics gave this town life. When they came here, Middlebury was a dying town with shuttered factories and empty stores. People were leaving, houses were abandoned. He turned to Keanu. Now we have a thriving town, a new school, a modern hospital, jobs for hundreds of families. And children dying from poisoning, Keanu added quietly. Connor's face darkened. Look, I understand that you feel some kind of connection to this place because of your grandfather, but you're an outsider. You don't live here, you don't pay taxes, you don't contribute to the economy. He paused. Wouldn't it be better for you to mind your own business in Hollywood and leave us to our own devices? Keanu looked at the mayor, seeing behind the paternal facade the real face of a man who had sold out the well-being of his constituents for his own gain. I'm not leaving, Mayor Connors, and I won't shut up. Connors returned to his desk, his movements sharper, his eyes colder. You think you can come in here with your Hollywood fame and change what we've spent years building? He leaned forward. Your grandfather thought so too. And look how it ended for him. Keanu felt his pulse quicken, but he kept his expression calm. Is that a threat, Mayor Connors? It's just a fact. History has a way of repeating itself, Mr. Reeves, especially for those who don't learn from it. Connors straightened, once again putting on the mask of a gracious host. Now, if you don't mind, I have an important meeting. As he walked out of City Hall, Keanu took a deep breath, trying to calm the anger bubbling inside. He didn't need to explain. It wasn't just a threat, it was a warning. The same warning his grandfather had received all those years ago. But unlike his grandfather, Keanu had something Joseph didn't: publicity, connections, and resources, and he intended to use them to their full potential. Michael Drayton. I've got to tell you, when I got the call that Keanu Reeves wanted to meet, I thought someone was pulling my leg. They were sitting in a small cafe in Burlington, far enough from Middlebury to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Keanu chose a table in the far corner, pulling his baseball cap down low on his forehead. Thank you for meeting with us, Keanu said, sliding a folder of documents toward the reporter. I heard you were interested in the situation in Middlebury. Drayton opened the folder, skimming the contents. I was, until it was made clear to me that this story would never see the light of day. He looked up at Keanu. Did you know that Nova Therapeutics is owned by Global Farm? And Global Farm owns half the media holdings in the country, including the company that publishes our newspaper. Keanu nodded. That's why I'm here. They can block an article, but they can't control social media, independent online publications, or, he paused, an interview with a celebrity. Drayton's eyes widened as the meaning of this sank in. You're willing to go public against Nova Therapeutics? I'm willing to publicly tell the story of Jacob Morris, a boy who's dying because of corporate greed. And I'm willing to use all my celebrity to make sure that story's heard. Drayton shook his head, but there was a thrill in his eyes. The thrill of a journalist who smells a big story. Do you understand what they're going to do to you? They're going to dig up every dirty story from your past, every mistake, every scandal. They're going to attack you through your allied media, through your politicians, through the system. Let them try, Keanu said simply. I've been in Hollywood for 30 years, Michael. You think I don't have experience dealing with people who try to destroy other people's reputations for profit? Drayton chuckled, closing the folder. Okay, Mr. Reeves, I'm in. But we're going to need more solid evidence. Medical records, water tests from different sources, eyewitness accounts. We need someone from inside Nova Therapeutics to confirm that toxic waste was dumped. You work on the story, Keanu said, standing up. I'll find the insider. The evening air was thick with the smell of approaching rain when Keanu returned to his grandfather's house. He was surprised to find a box of old VCR tapes lying on the porch. The tapes, neatly signed in Joseph Reeves' handwriting, dated back a decade. Inside, on an ancient television and VCR, Keanu found tapes, interviews with former Nova Therapeutics employees, evidence of illegal waste dumping, footage of secretly removed pipes that ran straight into the river. The evidence his grandfather had collected had been sitting there all these years, waiting to be used to bring justice. Keanu was engrossed in watching when there was a knock at the door. He approached the window warily. He saw a middle-aged woman in a formal suit, looking around nervously. Mr. Reeves? She asked when he opened the door. My name is Sarah Hunter. I work in the Quality Control Department of Nova Therapeutics. I was told that you were looking for information. Keanu carefully invited her inside, watching her every move carefully. Who told you? Dr. Greenberg. She nervously squeezed the strap of her bag. He's not what he seems. He's trying to help, but he's afraid. We're all afraid. Keanu invited her to sit down, not taking his eyes off her. Why are you here, Ms. Hunter? Sarah took a deep breath, as if gathering her strength. Because I can't keep quiet any longer. Over the past year, there have been more and more cases of non-compliance with safety tests. Waste that should be treated in a special way is simply dumped in the river. Her eyes filled with tears. I have a niece. She goes to the same school as the Morris boy. Drinks the same water. She opened her bag and pulled out a flash drive. It's all in here. Internal reports, testing data, management emails. They've known about this problem for years. They just figured it was cheaper to pay compensation to the families of those who got sick than to build a proper cleanup system. Keanu took the drive, feeling its weight. Not physical, but emotional. It was a key, a missing piece of the puzzle. You're risking your career, he said. Sarah smiled bitterly. I'm risking much more, Mr. Reeves. My future in this industry, maybe even my safety. But I can't wake up every morning knowing I'm part of a system that kills children. Suddenly, there was the sound of a car pulling up outside. Sarah jumped, running to the window. It's them, she whispered, horrified. They were following me. Keanu looked out as a black SUV pulled up in front of the house, and two men in business suits got out. Nova Therapeutic Security, Sarah went pale. I can't stay here. Go out the back door, Keanu said quickly. There's a path through the woods. It will take you to a road a couple miles from here. Sarah nodded, heading for the back door. Be careful, Mr. Reeves. These men will stop at nothing. Once she was gone, Keanu pocketed the flash drive and opened the front door before there was a chance to knock. Can I help you, gentlemen? He asked with cool politeness. The men exchanged glances. One of them, tall and broad-shouldered, with a military bearing, stepped forward. Mr. Reeves, my name is James Foster, head of security for Nova Therapeutics. We have received information that one of our employees may have come to visit you with confidential information. This is a serious violation of corporate policy. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Really? And I thought we were in a free country where people could talk about illegal corporate actions. Foster's face froze. Mr. Reeves, I strongly recommend that you hand over any materials that could have come into your possession illegally. Otherwise, the company will be forced to take action. What kind of action? Keanu asked calmly. Legal, Foster smiled without a trace of humor. Our lawyers will contact yours. You may have to explain why a famous actor suddenly became interested in the industrial waste of a small pharmaceutical plant, and why this interest arose precisely after the death of your grandfather, a famous eco-activist with a controversial reputation. Keanu took a step forward, entering Foster's personal space, and said in a quiet but firm voice, Tell your superiors, I am not my grandfather. I have resources that he could only dream of. And unlike him, I am not afraid of publicity. The children's ward at Middlebury Hospital was quiet, the only sound in the night being the muffled voices of the nurses. Keanu sat next to Jacob's bed, while Elizabeth went home to shower and change. Jacob's eyes suddenly opened, clear, surprisingly lucid for a child going through so much suffering. You're that actor, he whispered. My mother showed me your movies, just not the scary ones. Keanu smiled, moving closer. I'm glad you like the non-scary ones. Jacob smiled weakly. I like the one where you fly. The one where you stop bullets. You fought bad people there, too. It was just a movie, Keanu said softly. It wasn't real. But you fight bad people here, too, the boy said with unexpected seriousness. The ones who poisoned the water. Mom said you'd help us. Keanu's throat tightened with sudden emotion. I'll try, Jacob. I'll try my best. The boy nodded as if that were enough. Then he broke into a coughing fit, and Keanu helped him drink water from a bottle. Clean water that he himself had brought from Burlington. Are you afraid? Jacob asked when the fit had passed. The question caught Keanu off guard. Am I afraid? Mom says those people are dangerous, that they can hurt you. Jacob looked at him with serious, unchildlike wisdom in his eyes. Aren't you afraid? Keanu thought about it. He could lie, say that he wasn't afraid of anything, like the heroes of his movies. But this child staring death in the face deserved the truth. Sometimes I am, he answered honestly. But you know, Jacob, the most important things in life often require us to do what scares us. The boy considered his words and nodded slowly. Like medicine. They're scary and they hurt, but they help you get better. Exactly, Keanu smiled. Jacob closed his eyes, tired of the conversation. Keanu sat next to him, holding his small hand until the boy fell asleep. At that moment, he realized that he could no longer retreat, not for himself, not for the memory of his grandfather, and for this little boy, and for all the children Nova Therapeutics had made to suffer for profit. Morning news broadcasts across the country opened with the same footage. Keanu Reeves standing outside Middlebury Hospital, telling the story of Jacob Morris, a story of corporate greed, irresponsibility, and corruption. This boy is not dying from a natural disaster, not an accident, Keanu was telling the cameras. He's dying because a group of corporate executives decided that their profits were more important than human lives. Beside him was Michael Drayton, whose website had been the first to publish the full investigation, backed up by documents from Sarah Hunter's flash drive, old recordings from Joseph Reeves, and new tests from independent labs. We have evidence that Nova Therapeutics has known about this problem for at least a decade, the journalist was saying. They figured it was cheaper to pay for random lawsuits than to upgrade their treatment system. Social media exploded. #SaveJake.